The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The High Peak series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles, 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Welcome back to High Peak again, everybody. Now I'm beginning this particular run in a car park. There you go, there is said car park with my car parked right in the centre of it. Not many people here this morning. I don't blame people, to be honest, for staying away today because it is quite cold out here in the peaks. But to be honest with you, it's still going to be lovely to walk around this place. A lot of people do, especially in the summer. This is Edale. Edale, Island Valley. All this week we're tackling another batch in Derbyshire's High Peak, and I'm willing to wager that today's village is one that's known to a lot of you, even those who don't live here. If you've ever walked the Peak District, the chances are you'll have at least heard of this place if nothing else. This is Edale, famed for being the village located at the southern end of the Pennine Way. Without question, this is right up there with the Peak District's most visited villages. Tourism is by far the biggest economic driver here. What makes it even more popular is the fact that it's reachable not only by walking the Pennine Way, but also by road and the railway network pretty easily. From a historical standpoint, it's got a few interesting stories to tell. Edale was never originally the name of the village. Instead, it was the name of the river valley in which Edale sits. As it's spelt today, the name was first recorded in 1732. Earlier versions include Edale, Haydale, Idale, and Edel. From the Norman conquest onwards, the valley was in the Royal Forest of High Peak and its centre was marked by the Edale Cross. That served to position the boundary of the forest's three wards, Campana, Hopedale and Longdendale. Settlements in the valley were tiny and couldn't be called villages. Instead, they were booths or cattle farms known as vaccaries. Barber Booth still exists as a secondary hamlet to Edale village. Right on the boundary between Edale and Castleton is a rather big hill, Mam Tor, and in this video, we will scale it. Let's walk, folks. Visiting Edale is very easy. You have two main ways you can reach the village, or three if you fancy walking to it along the Pennine Way. One way is by road, and that's what we're driving on here. This is the lane that leads north from Hope. On our way into Edale, we'll pass by the site of a historic cotton mill because what this road is doing is skirting the northern edge of the River Noe. The Noe Valley was the original Edale and became the name for the village itself later. The mill, which was built to spin cotton in 1795, stands on the site of an old corn mill and tannery. Its conversion and enlargement was the work of Nicholas Cresswell mainly, although he had a lot of help from James Harrison, Robert Blackwell and Joseph Fletcher. In 1875, the Cresswells sold it to the Christies, who sold it to Fine Spinners and Doublers Limited in 1898. Workers were brought in from the local towns like Buxton and Glossop and were accommodated in both cottages and in a nearby house called Skinner's Hall. Many of the women workers walked from Castleton over Hollins Cross Pass, some 1,000 feet above sea level. They must have had a brilliant view every day on their morning commute. The mill continued spinning cotton until 1934, and then for the next 12 years it was used as a store. Post-war, it was seemingly forgotten about and fell into disuse. It was restored in the early 1970s by the Landmark Trust, but now it's a block of private apartments. With that behind us, let's continue on into Edale itself. We're heading for a car park on the southern fringes of the village, where most hikers coming to walk the Pennine Way choose to begin their journeys. The end of the trail, though, isn't in the car park, it's slightly further north. You see, Edale is built on a dead-end road. It's short, but also quite narrow and twisty, meaning it's not ideal for vehicles. Parking in the village centre is almost impossible. Additional parking near the railway station is provided at busy times by the parish council, because attracting people to Edale is what keeps the village's economy going. The main car park is right next to the village hall, a registered charity that's available to hire for everyone, whether you're a resident or a visitor. Most often this is used for fundraising events that support the local community. The hall was last refurbished in 2014 and has good facilities, including a kitchen, toilets, wheelchair access and its own Wi-Fi. 150 people is its maximum capacity. One of the groups that often meet here are the Edale Society. That's the village's historical lot. The Society publish a book which is simply titled The Book of Edale. In it, you can learn about the history of the village from its beginnings to recent times. The Society also holds talks, an annual dinner, and organises the biennial Beating the Bounds walk. Not far away from the car park and the village hall, we have the first of many visitor attractions in Edale. This is the Penny Pot Cafe. This place will be familiar to people who like to cycle the peaks, as well as those who explore them on foot. It's not uncommon to see this extremely popular cafe serving up its delicious food to hungry walkers and cyclists alike. Both inside and out there's plenty of seating for cycling groups of all sizes, and as such it also provides plenty of secure bike racking. For the early risers, this does a cracking full English breakfast. Its coffee is sourced locally from Roastology in Sheffield. What sets this place apart from other cafes in the peaks would be its exemplary selection of homemade cakes and tray bakes. Here you can pick up blackcurrant scones, caramel Oreo brownies, fruit cakes, date slices, cherry bakewells, and loads more. Now, to get into Edale village properly, you have to pass underneath a railway line. You can either go under the road bridge, or you can take this fancy looking tunnel which goes underneath it, just behind the Penny Pot Cafe. And this is the route that I'm choosing. We're going to go under here, and we're going to have a look at the railway station, which is just to the left. Now, if you don't want to walk, cycle or drive to Edale to try out the Penny Pot's cakes, there is another way to reach the village. Literally right next to the cafe is Edale railway station. This is on the Hope Valley line and receives a reasonably frequent service for such a rural area. The typical off-peak service here is one train an hour in both directions, with some gaps at certain times of the day. To the east is Sheffield and to the west is Manchester Piccadilly. Its services are operated by Northern Trains. Edale opened in 1894. It was originally named Grinsbrook Booth, which was a hamlet that's now been absorbed into Edale village. It was later retitled to reflect the name of the entire area. The station was originally equipped with wooden buildings and canopies and had 2 platforms, a signal box and sidings before becoming an unstaffed halt in 1969. When travelling by train to Edale, if after alighting you head directly north towards the start of the Pennine Way, the first thing you'll pass is a pub. Edale has 2 of those. This one's called the Rambler Inn, an appropriate name for the area, perfectly reflecting its connection to walkers and other outdoor enthusiasts. It's also rather fitting that the inn's owners are themselves lovers of the outdoors. The Rambler's origins go back to the early 19th century when it was a farmhouse. It was later converted into a pub. It has stone walls, wooden beams and period features. It's also been refurbished several times to modernise its facilities whilst keeping its historic character. The Rambler is well known for its traditional roaring fires in every room, its selection of local cask ales, and its summer beer garden. Okay, so far so good, apart from being perishingly cold. It's about -1 this morning. That tells you exactly why I've got this up. Keeping the tabs warm, keeping the ears warm and everything like that. Anyway, we've got 2 visitor centres to have a look at next. The first one of those is behind me, right there. We've got one on this corner, and there's another one on the opposite corner, which we'll catch in a second. Continuing north, we're now making for the village centre primarily, and the start of the Pennine Way. It's still a good half a mile away though, and between the Rambler and the village centre are 2 visitor centres, one on either side of the road. Firstly, on the left is the Peak Centre at Champion House. This is a residential centre that's aimed mostly at school parties, but it offers outdoor activities for all ages. The centre's vision is to provide a comfortable space for people to grow together and explore the outdoors. In 2019, the centre celebrated 50 years in the village, offering opportunities to enjoy not just the village, but also the landscape, whilst at the same time helping people to escape some of the stresses and troubles they have in their lives. Typical activities people might undertake here include rock climbing. Indeed, the centre does have, after all, a fantastic indoor climbing wall. They also offer things like archery and pond dipping on the premises, but all sorts of other stuff takes place in the surrounding valley, utilising things such as the Peak District's many natural rock formations and mountains like Kinder Scout and Mam Tor. The other place is the Moorlands Visitor Centre, the flagship building for the Moors for the Future Partnership. The building's design and features reflect its upland setting and its focus on moorland research and conservation. For example, it has a living roof of sedum turf to insulate it, and it's powered by an energy-saving ground source heat pump. Functionality-wise, what it does is raise awareness of the value of moorland, striving to protect it and conserve it through a series of management strategies. It also provides an inspirational experience for visitors to the Peak District, so pop in before you head off into the hills. You never know what you might learn. Just while the camera was doing its thing there, I was admiring, off camera, the beautiful scenery you can see to the south here. I mean, it's beautiful anywhere in the Peak District, to be honest with you, but at this particular point along the route, I just stood at that gate and was wistfully looking into the distance, into those hills. Now those hills will become important later, because at the end of this video we're going to scale one of them. Hope I have my Weetabix this morning for that. We're going to be heading uphill here anyway too, because as we progress through Edale village, the road does start to steadily climb a hill, and in doing so it passes the church, and that's next. We're now entering the village centre, and it's the Church of the Holy and Undivided Trinity that's first to see here, a Grade 2 listed building. This is the 3rd church that Edale has had to its name. This was built to replace a former church that stood across the road within a much older graveyard. The first church was erected in 1633 and consecrated on Trinity Sunday in 1634 by the Right Reverend Robert Wright, the Bishop of Coventry and Lichfield. It was rebuilt on the same site in 1812. It was originally a part of the parish of Castleton, but earned its own parochial status in 1863. The current church was built between 1885 and 1886 after being designed by the architect William Dawes of Manchester in the decorated Gothic style. The contractor was Thomas Beck of Matlock Bridge. The foundation stone was laid by Lord Edward Cavendish, and the building was consecrated by George Ridding, the Bishop of Southwell. The tower, rising to a height of 88 feet, was completed in 1889 by Hill of Lytton. The stained glass in the northeasternmost window is by Comper in memory of Elizabeth Margaret Champion. It dates from 1905. The east window, also by Comper, is a memorial to a former vicar, John Champion. Within the churchyard is the War Memorial, another Grade 2 listed structure. It features the names of the local residents that died during World War I, but was later renovated following the end of World War II. So if this is a touristy type village like it claims to be, what about staying in the area? Surely there must be plenty of places you can stay if you want to explore Edale and its valleys and mountains. Well, you'd be right, there are. Edale has several campsites all around it for a start. The 2 pubs also offer accommodation as well, plus there's a raft of holiday cottages across the Peak District in general. In the village itself is the Stonecroft Country Guest House, a B&B, which is on your screens now. Okay, we've reached the top of the village. About 15 minutes, like I said, from the car park to this end of Edale. And it's a dead end at this point. Well, if you're in a vehicle anyway. On foot, this is a very important area because a lot of hill walkers around here know this part of Edale very, very well. This is where the Pennine Way begins. Of course, if you like it here that much, you could always move out here. Rest assured if you do, as a local, you're well provided for. Now firmly in the village centre, here's one of the facilities you'd have at your disposal, the village shop and post office. It's within a large complex known as Newfold Farm, and that also has another cafe. Newfold Farm is one of the oldest farms in Edale. Since the 1960s, one of its major attractions has been Cooper's campsite. It was run for many years by Roger and Penny Cooper, who took it on from Roger's father and ran it until their retirement in 2020. The campsite is made up of 4 fields, named after some of the beautiful birds that inhabit the valley and the surrounding moors. The next lane to the left is the start of the Pennine Way long-distance footpath, marked by this little sign. The Pennine Way is a national trail, mostly within England, but a small section of it crosses the border into Scotland at its northernmost extreme. It ends at Kirk Yetholm, just inside the Scottish border. The path runs along the Pennine Hills, sometimes described as the backbone of England. Although it's not the UK's longest national trail, it is, according to many who have walked the entire length of its 268 miles, one of Britain's best known and toughest. The record time for completion of the Pennine Way is 2 days, 10 hours, 4 minutes and 53 seconds, set by John Kelly in 2021. Now I know I do a lot of walking, but there's no way on earth I could smash that time. Now we're not about to walk along the Pennine Way here because there's no point. We'll meet the thing several times in future episodes. The official start of the Pennine Way is the Old Nags Head, a former smithy which dates back to 1577. Now Edale's other pub, this is filled with plenty of authentic character and charm. Boasting a wonderful location and a great atmosphere, and having been voted in the top 20 country pubs in the UK by The Times, the Old Nags Head will have you coming back to Edale time after time. The inn must have satisfied the needs of countless weary travellers over the centuries. Fred Herdman was a former licensee and a mine of information to anyone who crossed the pub's threshold. He was also an experienced guide and a mountain rescue organiser. For 15 years he held both the licences for the Nag's Head and the former Church Inn, which resulted in an amusing story that the locals know well. When a drunk was refused a drink at one pub, he staggered to the other one, only to be thrown out by the same landlord. In 1955, the Nag's Head became the first Edale mountain rescue base, and its first exercise took place on February the 20th, 1956. Edale Mountain Rescue had been formed several decades earlier, following incidents in the 1920s. The Nag's Head also served as a station for Tom Tomlinson, the first warden for the Peak District National Park. Even on cold days like today, there are some hardy souls about. You all know me, I'll walk around in any weather, but there's still some hikers out here in the Peak District today, and quite a few of them I've seen disappearing off up the Pennine Way. I wonder how far up it they're about to go. We have one more landmark to see in this particular area of Edale, and that's the school, before we start making our way back. Edale Endowed School was originally built in 1819 on land given by Elizabeth Bowden. New school buildings were built in 1868, and the whole thing later became a primary school. So it remains today. From here we need to make our way back to the beginning, and that means crossing some of this gorgeous landscape on a right of way or two. This path we're on here passes under the railway line and emerges close to the mill. Here's a bit about the local geology while we walk. Edale is effectively made up of limestone and shales. Indeed, much of the landscape owes its character to those underlying shales. Once they decayed back to their original mud form, they allowed the land to slip and nature to carve this beautiful valley which we've got the pleasure of being in today. The landscape does enough all by itself to bring people here, and with it the promise of tourism money. Mind you, that didn't stop those with the best business heads trying to profit from other untapped riches. In 1938, a speculative oil well was drilled here with the hope of bringing more riches to the valley. You can imagine it now, can't you? Edale being Derbyshire's answer to the Texas oil wells. It proved to be a fruitless exercise though. Its failure ensured that the landscape has remained untouched and available for all to enjoy to this day. After that short trek, we find ourselves back at the start, and the local playing field is all that stands between us and the car park. This has got a super playground for children with some tougher climbing stuff for the bigger kids, as well as a tennis court and a football pitch. All pretty standard stuff in a village that's anything but ordinary otherwise. Okay, we're back in the car park and it's filled up a bit more now. A lot more people have decided to come out for the day here to Edale, and I can't blame them really. That sun is starting to poke its head out above the clouds. It might be out by the time we get to Mam Tor later, big mountain that we're going to scale. Well, I say mountain, it's actually technically speaking not a mountain, but we'll cover that when we actually get there. To get to Mam Tor, we have to go through Barber booth. Let's hop into the car and check that out. So, as we've learned in this episode already, Edale wouldn't be Edale if it wasn't for the existence of several small hamlets that predated it. These hamlets were called booths. Whilst Grinsbrook Booth might have been absorbed into the village now and isn't often shown on modern maps, another of these booths still exists today. Away west of the village is Barber Booth. So what exactly is a booth in this context? Well, most were cattle farms and were originally established in the 13th century as vaccaries. That's a posh word for them. There were several along the valley of the River Noe, which have since developed into the hamlets of Grinsbrook Booth, Ollerbrook Booth, Nether Booth and Upper Booth, the latter of which was known alternatively as Crowdonley Booth and Over Booth. Barber Booth also had a few different names, including Whitmorley Booth, Lady Booth and Lower Booth. It has the local landowning family to thank for its present name. The Barber family were resident here, hence the name of the hamlet now. The population of Barber Booth increased during the construction of the Cowburn Railway Tunnel in the late 19th century. In this part of the Edale Valley, there were also large military camps during both World Wars. In Barber Booth, you can get up close and personal with the River Noe, which we last encountered in Brough. When we were there, the river we saw was a wide, fast-flowing affair. Here it's a little different. It's much narrower and more like an upland stream. It flows approximately 12 miles from its source, which is the confluence of two streams running off Kinder Scout. It then skirts the southern edge of Edale before running towards Hope. Like many rivers in Derbyshire, the Know was used historically to power watermills, and the one at Edale was just one example of the many this would have provided for. Barber Booth has one main landmark otherwise, Edale Methodist Chapel. This was built for the Wesleyans in 1811 and was erected at a cost of £300. It was designed to seat 150 people, and it's not unreasonable to assume that the chapel would have needed a capacity that big. Barber Booth was close to the major cross-Pennine packhorse routes used since Roman times for carriage of goods, including salt and later cotton, between Cheshire and Yorkshire. The pack horses also brought corn and then cotton to and from Edale Mill before the railway was built in 1893. Edale was a recognised resting point before and after the high moorlands, with facilities for both horses and their drivers, known as jaggers. There's never been a resident minister at this chapel, but it's always been an important place of gathering and worship, particularly for the hill farming families who have farmed the valley for generations. Methodism in Edale predates this chapel though. Here's the story of how it came to the valley, and it's rather unusual. In 1750, a man named David Taylor was travelling late at night through these hills in a blinding snowstorm, fatigued and almost perishing. He and a companion reached a solitary house in Barber Booth, knocked on the door and walked in after shaking the snow off their clothes. The owner of the house at the time, John Hadfield, wasn't best pleased with two strangers who had marched their way into his house. So he reached down his sword, which hung over the mantelpiece with other armour used by him in the Battle of Preston Pans a few years before. He never got to use it though, because his fears were dispelled when Taylor, stepping up to him, exclaimed, "Peace be to this house." Methodist services commenced in that house forthwith, and a society was formed, of which John Hadfield was the first member. The travelling preacher, James Rydell, would be born there later, and a farmstead across the valley gave us the birthplace of Daniel Eyre and Peter Eyre, who were both Wesleyan ministers. The house has since been pulled down, but the chapel stands close to its spot. This story can be found in the chapel today, by the way, hung on the wall. Hill climbers around here have lots of gradients they can take on, but Edale is known for two in particular, and both are right on the parish boundary. To the north is Kinder Scout, the summit of which is a moorland plateau and national nature reserve. At 636 metres above sea level, it's the highest point in the Peak District, the highest point in Derbyshire, and the highest point in the East Midlands. From the top you can see the city of Manchester and the Greater Manchester Conurbation, as well as Winter Hill near Bolton, and in good weather the mountains of Snowdonia in Wales. However, climbing Kinder Scout takes a bit of doing. It's by no means an easy walk, and as such I didn't have time to attempt it. Luckily though, Edale has another mountain that we can reach the summit of much more easily, Mam Tor. Okay, it's been a while since I've walked up a hill, a big hill, anywhere like this. And I tell you what, this is going to be an effort. That is Mam Tor, and in a minute we're going to be right on top of it. Officially, Mam Tor is not a mountain, it's classed instead as a big hill. It is, after all, only a mere 1,696 feet above sea level at its summit. I don't know about you, that's still pretty bloody high as far as I'm concerned. Its name means Mother Hill, so called because frequent landslips on its eastern face have resulted in a multitude of mini hills beneath it. These landslips are caused by unstable lower layers of shale, which also gives the hill its alternative name, the Shivering Mountain. Mam Tor was declared to be one of the 7 wonders of the peak by Thomas Hobbes in 1636. The hill is crowned by a late Bronze Age and early Iron Age hill fort and 2 Bronze Age bowl barrows. Located on the southern edge of the Dark Peak, it overlooks the White Peak, including the dry gorge of Winnet's Pass. It's a dominating link between the eastern end of Rushup Edge and the western end of the Great Ridge, which together separate the Hope Valley from Edale. A feature of Mam Tor is the active landslide which invades its southeastern side almost to its summit and interrupts the ramparts of the hill fort unless its builders used it as part of its defences. This rotational landslide began almost 4,000 years ago. The slide affects a road built below from Sheffield to Chapel on the Frith, and it's one of the most extreme cases of geological problems affecting a transport system in Britain. Its current mean annual movement is around 25 centimetres, although this increases greatly after heavy winter rainfall. Made it to the top. Google Maps reckons it's an 8-minute walk. I'm on like 38. Had to stop several times coming up, but you know what? It's worth it. Look at this view. Let me tell you folks, the wind up here is something else. It's worth the climb, and the views are spectacular. This winter wind, you've got to be prepared. It's gone back up. My ears are cold. I'm getting back down off this mountain. If it is a mountain, we'll head off to the next one. And that'll do us for Edale. Walking in the Peak District is a pleasure, a joy that can't be rivaled by anything locally. It's not difficult to see why people come to Edale to explore, adventure and walk these hills and mountains. Tomorrow we're making our way deeper into the valley and we're going to be seeing a place famed for a huge quarry. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.